All right, guys, and welcome back to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. I'm your host, Jason Lee. Clint wasn't able to join us today, but I do have a special partner in crime joining us today, Chad Burke, with the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region. And we're joined by Peter Baird, who is with the Greater Houston Partnership and is heading up their upskill division. Something that Chad holds a special place in our heart here at the Economic Alliance, and they're going to share a little bit more about that later. First of all, though, the agenda for today is to dive into exactly what Upskill does, their role and the responsibility with Greater Houston Partnership and the impact that they're making, some of the initiatives and focus that they have kind of for the balance of 2021 and even looking out into the future, and then a little bit about the pandemic and the impact. I've had several individuals that we've talked about, and especially in workforce development, that shared really just how challenging it was, right? It's not only for those without work, but those trying to find and create craft and opportunities to create work. So it's been a rough road, but we're excited about 2021 and all they have to offer. So Peter, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. It's been great to come to see you all.
And before the show, you were talking a little bit about this two-gap challenge. So before we dive into what Upskill is, talk to us about that.
No, and that's really helpful because Upskill Houston was really created to address what we would call as the two-gap challenge. One is, if you think about it as a skills gap, whereby people and individuals that employers need don't have the skills that they need to be successful in the 21st century economy. And then the second gap is really the people gap, which is really more focused on the employer, is can they access the skilled individuals when and where they need them, and that's the people gap. And so that's really the two-gap challenge. And when you think about what's been going on, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, in terms of how roles are changing, it's getting more and more exacerbated because it's not as simple as it used to be if you think about technology and what folks are expecting folks to have in terms of their technology skills. And then the other piece to all of this is really this challenge gets even more exacerbated because there are perceptions and mischaracterizations about a lot of really good jobs and occupations that don't require a four-year college degree. And as many of us know, we have, as a society, encouraged so many people to think about college as the only pathway to success. Mm-hmm. And we know here in the Port Region there are some great opportunities that don't require that four-year college degree. And how do we get people to see those opportunities?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what we've been trying to champion at this show is education around those opportunities and really trying to drive. I spoke to a guy with SUMEF the other day, and we had a discussion specifically about how do you make industry sexy, right? And so that's kind of the new slogan of what we're trying to think about is how do you make it cool to get into some of these jobs because they exist and they're needed. Chad, do you have any questions?
Well, I'll say this. It's been really amazing to watch what Peter has done with Upskill Houston and this entire effort. We've been working on this together for a long time. In fact, I remember when Peter first came on at GHP to head up the effort, and then how he reached out into the economic sectors and specifically on the east side for us into the petrochemical industry, working with ECMA, talking directly with our community colleges, which do a lot of the training, and really kind of diving in to see, one, did we have an industry or company-led effort that there was true demand and it could be defined and they had partnerships set up. He dove right into that. And then what was created from that, Upskill Houston, which I'm gonna ask him to kind of walk us through, that entire program, is really a standard for the way that workforce development programs should be set up across the country. And Peter and I both have been to a number of different conferences and working with different organizations around the country and have seen a multitude of ways to do it. I would say this is the way to do it. You have to start with the guy that has the job, and if those people have a pain point or a job, deficit, then that's where you have to start, and that builds the program from there. And that's what he's focused on. He works great with everybody in the region. Everybody knows who Peter Baird is, and he's just a good friend. So with that, Peter, I just wanted to put a plug in for you as someone who's seen you develop just an amazing program. But why don't you kind of walk us through Upskill Houston and tell us kind of what you did to help develop that entire program that helps us workforce And I have to say this first. Workforce development is part of economic development. If we don't have a qualified, trained, ample supply of workforce, we can't compete for the projects that we're trying to land here. When we're competing against Mexico and China and Singapore and Europe or other parts of even the Gulf Coast possibly, we have to have a workforce to be competitive, to meet our bottom line, which is economic development. And that's why it's so important.
Absolutely.
Because in many respects, Chad, talent is our competitive advantage.
Exactly.
If we don't have the talent, it's going to be really, really challenging, and it's our most important asset. And I think the other piece I would frame as we get into what Upskill Houston has been and where it will probably adjust is when we think about the workforce, there are two big elements to the workforce. There are all the individuals and young people that are coming through the school system and education system that are coming into the workforce. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic has helped us also understand there's a whole group of workers that are already in the workforce that need to be upskilled and reskilled in a very different way. And we've oriented initially primarily more on the kind of how do we help individuals coming up through the education system. And so Upskill Houston was really created to kind of how do we provide more opportunities for individuals that are in that system. And we also will come back to, we have a challenge we're going to have to deal with of kind of the existing incumbent workers that have been displaced or impacted by this. But Upskill Houston was really created in many respects to focus on this workforce effort. And as Chad was getting at, the employers are critical. And in many respects, the work we've done with other folks has been focused on thinking about this as a supply chain issue. Mm-hmm. If you think about the employers not only having the jobs, but they know what skills are needed, how many and of what they need, and where they get their best talent from, treat it like a supply chain. This is a talent pipeline that has all those qualities. And if employers aren't articulating those critical elements, then it's really hard for education and community-based organizations to actually add value to the individuals as they're coming through that pipeline.
Right, absolutely. I'll interject right here.
Yeah, go ahead.
To that point, and we are in the petrochemical sector and then the maritime or supply chain logistics sector as well, but petrochemical really led the way for us in this region because the industry came to us and said, we have this need, right? We have to have this many employees to supplement what's about to retire. And it was that initiative from those employees. And in our sector, we were fortunate because it was a group that was cohesive, right? And they could come together as an association that is located in a region that could speak with almost one voice. And that's what really helped us be effectively address the issue. And then semi-annually, about every 2, maybe 3 years, we re-ask the hard question is, what do you need? What are those demands that you have? What are the jobs that you are short on? How much training do they need? What type of training do they need? So everything that Peter's talking about gets reassessed on a every 2 to 3 year effort. Otherwise, you got mission creep, and then you're over here marketing and trying to push people into a pipeline where there's no job at the outset.
Absolutely.
So that part of that is critical to the entire regional workforce effort, is that communication piece between the guy that has the job and then what it takes to get that job up pipeline, basically upstream.
Yep. You talked about regional effort, and there's a lot of organizations that are serving ECMA, CMEF to really create and put these craft positions in a place where they can actually then go out and do the job. Now, obviously, you guys are rolled into that. How do you keep in alignment? Because the one thing that I'm just blown away is everybody's rowing in the same direction and everybody's working together, right? So how is it that you can sustain a collaborative effort so that you're working to achieve the goal and not stepping on each other's toes is the wrong word, but you get everybody kind of in the same pond trying to create the same solution. There could be some ineffectiveness. How are you guys making that work?
Well, I think part of it is how do you create a collective table with all the stakeholders that add that value to the individuals that are coming through that pipeline.
Great.
Which is education, community colleges, community-based organizations, the public workforce system, the employers. In many respects, all it takes is one little piece of information to be off key, and it disrupts the supply chain,
Right.
the pipeline. And
Right.
so part of it is, how do you create this collective table where people are building relationships and learning how to speak with each other? So if you take the employers, at the end of the day, there are three things they care about. Can I access a qualified and skilled applicant pool when and where I need it? How quickly can I get them to full productivity? And how do I retain and grow them over time? And if you think of those as the three critical issues that an employer thinks about, that's where the ROI comes in. So if you think about what education and what community-based organizations and others are doing, it's like, how am I preparing to get someone to the front door of an employer, qualified and skilled, on not just the technical skills, but the foundational soft skills, which are more and more important than we've ever heard before. And now, we were tracking this trend related to technology. They're expecting higher levels of digital skills. And so how do you ensure everyone's walking to the front door of the employer with all of that, so the employer, one, doesn't have to remediate, or then doesn't have to either develop additional skills that should have been developed earlier. And so we should be thinking about all those stakeholders as they add value all along that system, and we've got to make sure they're adding the right kind of value within their wheelhouse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, yeah, you were spot on. So talk to us about some of the value that you guys are focused on as we kind of navigate looking forward. So,
well, I mean, I think we took 2019 to take a step back to say, and when we first started Upskill Houston, it was really, let's focus on an industry sector, let's create another one, let's create these multiple tables of this collective of all the stakeholders. And at the end of the day, we were going like, Houston's, the region is 7 million people, and how do you actually scale something like that? And so, Bob Harvey, who's the CEO of the partnership, turned to me and was like, how do you actually scale this? Because just laying up another collaborative doesn't get us to the scale that's going to make the impact. So we took a step back to look at both the data, to look at some key trends, to then think about what do we need to be doing. And some of the key trends that we identified were, one, the half-life of skills is getting shorter and shorter. If you think about what has happened in work and everything else, it's getting shorter and shorter. When you were an engineer 20 years ago or 30 years ago, you didn't need to reskill yourself for a while.
We see that on our staff here in marketing, communications, events. The technology is always evolving, and staff is always, okay, well, we need to learn that program now. And so there's a lot of kind of incumbent self-training, but there are great avenues. I mean, you can access so much stuff online these days that you can teach yourself a whole brand new program to develop a podcast, right? And edit it and send it out. Whereas, 2 years ago, we weren't up to speed on that. There's and then I'm sure we'll talk about kind of the evolution or acceleration from all of the technology that came from the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it never stops now. You have to continually upskill to keep up. Almost.
Yeah, no, and then that's one of the points, which is like, technology is showing up in the workplace with automated technology and AI and machine learning and all these other things that are disrupting the skills you need and the skills that you actually need to be successful in terms of, what a robot and machine learning can do. I now need to understand how to extract that data and analyze it rather than kind of did I document the data. So those were some of the key trends. And, and if I think, we also then began to think about what would it take to scale? And part of it gets to this notion of skills is now the currency.
there you go.
If you think about skills versus what I will say is the credential, and when I say credential, a 4-year degree, there are skills inherent in the credential, but it's not always clear that that credential will lead to an intended purpose. I mean, if you go down a nursing program, the intended purpose of that degree is to allow you to become a nurse. If you take a history degree, there are skills built into that, but there's not quite a clear line of sight to an occupation.
Right.
So how are we helping individuals understand whether it's data analytics or communication skills that are embedded in that credential, because employers are now finding they can't just rely on the credential as a proxy for what those skills are. They've got to articulate the skills. And so the employers need to, in many respects, articulate those skills so education can know about it, and individuals, to your point, Chad, know about it. And it's like, I can go get that skill. I can either get it at the community college, or I can get it at a boot camp, or I can get it online. And so that skills-based hiring becomes critically important so that we have a new way of communicating so that we can do it much more quickly than it's ever been done before. The second piece really is when you think how challenging it is today to understand what do I want to do and how do I get there. Career coaches and career counselors are what we should be investing in to help people make those informed choices to go like, if I'm going to go get a 4-year degree, what should it look like? And how do I deal with the fact that a lot of the occupations are almost now hybrid, which is I need someone who's got some engineering, but I need someone who also has IT. And they're taught in totally different parts of the university. So these hybrid jobs that now combine multiple different disciplines are really hard to develop. And so how do you think about that? And so we need to provide career coaching and counseling. And if you've been a worker that's been displaced, the assumption of our public workforce system has been, if you lose your job, you're probably going to go back to a similar job in a similar role, in a relatively short period of time. But these trends are accelerating at a rate that we've got to find different ways to upskill individuals that already have a core set of skills to find new pathways. And that's, we could try to say, let everyone figure it out for themselves, but career coaches and counselors armed with information from employers can actually help people navigate and find the right pathways. So that's the other critical piece to this. And then at the end of the day, we know that people need to try it out, get some experience, whether as an apprenticeship or an internship or even just a mini internship where they actually try doing the activity so that they know, is this the right thing for me? And at the end of the day, it's how do we continue to communicate and market? And those are kind of our key pillars of our strategy going forward, which is still have employer-led, but how do we scale the information in a different way?
Wonderful. I think one thing that you talked about that really resonates is this counseling and tryout idea. I think so much today, it's hard to hold people's attention. And so if they're not being engaged or feel like there's something that's going to draw them further, they're just going to move on to the next thing. And I don't know, I don't have the data to support it, but I read somewhere that people will, in a matter of 12 years, they might have 5-6 jobs. Back when like my first job was 16 years. That's just what you did. You found a job, you liked it, you got paid well, you stayed. Now it's like, I'm not engaged here. Let's go on to the next thing. And that's kind of a scary thought process. But if you're getting counseling or coach, perhaps square peg round hole, right? So if there's more investment on you up front, there's more likelihood that you're going to stay. There's more likelihood that you're in the right position, or maybe helping you upskill that little deficiency, that one thing that maybe is holding you back from it being the perfect job. Well, let's get you that skill.
Well, and then to this other point, which is when you think about how we finance people's education and the heavy student debt that's there, if there was really good career coaching and counseling, people would probably make better choices. And I'm not saying they're making bad choices, but they could make better choices that lead to a pathway so that they can actually finance their education without an undue hardship. And right now, if folks don't complete a 2-year associate's degree with some skills, they're going to have debt that they're probably not going to be able to pay off very easily. But if you added, to your point, an additional skill related to marketing to my got the degree, and I didn't go for my 4 years, there's a benefit for me.
Right, absolutely.
And if you did the same thing with 4 years, but part of it is like, how do we help people find those pathways so that they're then not saddled with debt? And we know that right now there's like $1.7 trillion of student debt out there,
which is fixing to be forgiven, right?
Huh?
Is it fixing to be forgiven? No.
Who knows? And that raises a totally different debate. But
we don't have enough episodes for that one, Chad.
When you think about the weight it has on individuals that are trying to start out, and it takes 10, 20,
how many people do you know that
years
still have their student debt, right, that they're dealing with, right?
And that's why career coaching and counseling becomes critically important in this process.
Well, and I'll interject here. Patty Bell, our workforce development director, focuses on that. We call it marketing, but counseling and career direction is really a better term for it. We just happen to focus on the careers that are in our region and the pathways to get there. I've always described it as we're opening doors for students and incumbent workers or displaced workers that don't know that there's a door there that might take 18 to 24 months of training, and costs $6,000 or $8,000 versus a 4-year degree that costs $100,000. And this door leads to a skill with a direct job at the end of it. So it's that counseling part of it that goes hand in hand with the marketing part of it. So we're trying to push people into that talent pipeline, but we're pushing them in there with information so that they can see the path that they need to go that gets them to that job, right? And doesn't saddle them with that debt, right?
And this gets to this whole perception issue related to occupations that don't require a 4-year college degree, and even arguably 4-year college degree. And we did some focus group work to understand how should we be communicating that to individuals and to parents. So we listened to parents and to students to listen to what were the kinds of qualities they wanted in the jobs. What were who did they want to hear about this from? Who did they want to talk to about it, or who's their trusted advisor? That led us then to create something that we have on a website called upskillmylife.org. And that is intended to help these video vignettes of workers telling their stories. They wanted to hear from workers. They wanted to hear what they get to do, why they like it, it's safe, what I get to do because I make good money. And they wanted to hear from that. And they wanted, educators, family, friends, and neighbors, and faith leaders are their trusted sources about hearing this information, as well as hearing it from individuals. So we've done that. But in the pandemic, I think we've also learned that we can actually take it into a different space. And I think this is another area where I think Chad and Upskill Houston can partner, which is how do you get kind of an executive with an employer and 1 or 2 of their employees to actually talk about why the industry is important, and then what these roles these workers have done. We did a pilot of that with Group 1 Automotive, talking about auto technicians and sales folks. But it really was about talking to boys and girls clubs. Here's this opportunity, but you get to hear from someone who understands the industry really well, but then hear the individual. And I think this whole idea of being able to do this virtually is going to actually help extend our ability to coach and counsel and break down perceptions and barriers.
That's a great segue to the pandemic in and of itself. I mean, because you're just describing that kind of catapulted you to pull an initiative that would make a virtual environment. What other changes did you see kind of shifted because of the pandemic? Well,
I think there were a couple things. One, this whole idea that I was talking about, we were tracking, the embedding of technology into the workplace. Who knew how to use Zoom before, and who knew all this other stuff? But we knew digital skills were going to be important. They just accelerated. I interviewed the CHRO and the Chief People Officer for Waste Management, and they used to have people clock in their time. And as a result of the pandemic and social distancing, they created an app so that everyone now does it. So it's now much more actually efficient and effective. And so it's now thinking about how technology has shown up in the workplace is very, very different now. The other thing I think we've seen is, a lot of things got pulled forward in good ways, but then there was this displacement of a lot of folks, and we know that the disproportionate impact have been on women and populations of color and communities of color. In addition, there's even a more significant impact based upon educational attainment. So 4-year college degreed folks are just fine. If you look at the data, they're at 4% unemployment here in Texas. And when you start backing down to some college or an associate's degree, it ticks up a little more. If you only have a high school diploma, it ticks up even more. And if you have no high school diploma, it ticks up even more. And so we know that from the last recession, most of the jobs that got created and recovered after the financial crisis were much more in the 4-year college degree or applied technical, where you can go to a community college and get very specific technical training. It's the folks that have that less educational attainment that are going to be barbelled in a potentially, a way where they won't find a pathway. And I think we're going to have to find ways to help them find pathways, going back to our other piece, into roles in healthcare, into logistics and distribution, and other things where there are other pathways. But those skill levels where you've got to kind of take what they're skilled. they've done really good stuff.
Yeah.
They probably have good customer service skills,
Yep.
good problem-solving skills, but how do you get them into some other roles with some additional technical skills? And I think our greatest concern to how we open with Chad is if our people are our greatest asset because of their talent and skills, we've got to think about that part of the population in a very different way to help them find that pathway. And the top jobs being hired right now are registered nurses in the state of Texas, which means there are pathways if you start out as a patient care assistant to eventually get to that registered nurse, or other opportunities within healthcare. And healthcare is just one example, but we know also from the pandemic, transportation, distribution, logistics is a big thing. And there are lots of opportunities in there, even starting out in most entry-level roles. You can get into supply chain management in a very different way by getting into that.
I've had a member of ours sit in one of our workforce development meetings and say, I would hire 50 forklift drivers today if I could get them, with the amount of warehouse
Wow.
goods that we move in this region. And that's a $15 to $20 an hour job,
But I mean, then there's a
and then-
professional association that
Exactly.
can actually help you find other pathways to being, how do you do the scheduling and how do you
Yep.
do all these other things.
Yep.
So it's an entry level into another piece, and we've got to help, one, communicate that, but then also paint the picture of how do you get there.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So we're getting close to time. So as we get ready to wrap up, do you have any last thoughts or things that you'd want to share with the audience?
No, but I think the biggest piece is it's really going to take all of us, one, to help employers and hear employers in terms of what they need. But it's going to take all of us, whether community-based organizations, education, to address both that flow of individuals coming through kind of the education pipeline, but this set of incumbent workers that we're going to have to also pay attention to in a very different way than we have had before. And I think it's going to take the resources, arguably, that are coming through the city and counties, as opposed, that are coming, to help think, how would we actually invest in our workforce differently than, the shorter term stuff. We need to make a bigger investment in individuals to help them find those skills that actually allow for a more resilient and more inclusive recovery.
Fantastic. And one thing that just always amazes me is the kind of the why behind the what for people such as yourself, because you could have a lot of jobs, but for some reason you found this job became your job, and it became your gift, and it became your passion. Clearly you're passionate about it. Can you give us a little backdrop on what makes you tick?
Sure. And so it's interesting. To your point, I've had multiple different jobs, and I started out primarily in affordable housing, where I worked with Habitat for Humanity, and then I worked for Fannie Mae and supported affordable housing and community development, and then I worked for United Way, thinking about community impact related to education, financial stability, and health, so social service kind of things. And at the end of the day, as I thought about it more and more, is if we were going to get rid of generational poverty, a good job is the best solution to that. And the private sector
Can't say that enough, right?
And the private sector provides
That's
that
right.
opportunity in a very different way. And so when
it.
this opportunity came, it was like, this is my next
That's
chapter
awesome.
in my life.
I get chill bumps when you say that, because I literally put that on some of our materials. Is the best program out there is a good job,
Yeah.
right? That's the way you lift yourself and your family to the next level, right? I'll make
And the private sector provides
and
that.
the private sector provides that, and it's so we are both working on parts of that puzzle. If we can attract the companies, the private sector, to invest the capital to create those jobs, then we're creating the avenues that Peter's pushing them all into, right?
Right.
So I'll say this. Everything that you heard from Peter today, and this is the way that he has done his business, the way how Upskill works, and the way GHP has supported him, is with strategic thinking. And you heard that through all of your comments, and the way that you assess, in a way, Upskill Houston workforce development is it's a voice in the wilderness, because each company, those private companies are pedaling on their own little treadmill, and they're trying to solve their problems, right? And people are trying to solve their individual problems, right? And society, we're trying to solve those problems. But there's this overlay of a strategic plan that, like Peter says, that lifts us all up, that creates an entire better economy for everybody.
Right.
And at the same time, it makes us more competitive so that when we're competing for those capital dollars. But strategic thinking, relationship building, leadership, and vision is the words that I would use to describe what Upskill does. And it takes that because it's an umbrella that covers the whole greater Houston area, all sectors of the economy, all parts of the town, from the upstream on the west and the downstream on the east and the port out the bay. I mean, that's a big bite that Peter has on his table, and it is. He builds relationships. He leads with a clear vision and a good strategy, and so I mean it's what they are doing. What he does is just, it's the standard. It's what other large metropolitan areas in the country should be doing. In his final comment on, hey, the private sector creates the jobs that lifts people on the next rung of
generational poverty. Gets rid of that.
Yeah,
I love
and
that.
so I can't say enough. I appreciate him, appreciate his friendship, really appreciate what he's doing for the greater Houston area.
Well, Chad said that. He said specifically he wanted to have you on this episode, and he said that typically you buy him lunch after every time y'all meet. So, and after that plug, I can't blame him. Just kidding. But with that being said, it is inspirational to hear your story. I mean, to like I said, to know where you came from, to serve, and to then being your passion, giving back. It's just a wonderful testimony. And so, for those that are listening, if they want to get actively involved, if they want to be more involved and serve in some manner, what's the easiest way for them to reach out or get involved with Upskill and GHP?
One, you can go to Houston.org, which is the partnership's website, and there are various ways to do it, or you can just send an email to upskill@houston.org, and my team will be there and we'll be happy to engage. And there are just lots of opportunities.
Fantastic. So for our audience, again, Peter, we appreciate you today. If you're watching and you're observing or listening to this podcast, we always want to encourage you that we're always trying to call people to get out of the stands. You got to get in the game. Being a member of an organization isn't about stroking a check and then sending it in every year and getting your name on some collateral. It really is about involvement in the community, everybody rowing together. And that's the purpose of this show. It's the mission of the Economic Alliance to really serve and then bring all these organizations together to create jobs, create opportunity, and help keep the pipeline growing and serving. And so I want to encourage you, if you're watching or listening, to, if you haven't taken action and actively gotten involved, to step out there and do just that. If you want to stay tuned to the show, you can go to the Houston Port Region Economic Alliance. You can go to the website, and then you can subscribe to any of our channels. YouTube, we have a Facebook page, we have a LinkedIn page. You can reach out to us individually. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. And again, get out there and do something about it, and tune into us next week. Thanks for your time today.